Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 544. My opponent had the white pieces and played c4, the English opening. I go knight f6, and he goes knight c3, and I go c5. So I'm setting up a symmetrical English and trying for an early d5. Now this is one position where actually white can stop me from playing d5. Because of the knight on c3, he now has the move e4. So if he really wants to prevent d5, he can do that. And this would lead to some kind of interesting position. It starts to look a bit like a Sicilian. For example, if I were to play d3 and then he follows up with d4 and I take, it could be a Maroczy bind position against the Sicilian. So that'll be an interesting transformation here. But it's not that common for English players to play that way. Usually they will play with knight f3 or g3. G3 is what my opponent selected, and I do get in the d5 move. So we get this exchange. Also, it's interesting to note that d5 is one of the top recommendations in the opening book there. So it is a move that is played in this position. See, I take back, and then he develops his bishop here. So he's immediately getting some pressure on my knight, and I decide to support it with e6. There's this funny idea in the opening book of retreating the knight to c7. I didn't really think about this one. Yeah, and maybe the knight will come back later into the game on e6, perhaps, maybe after pushing the e-pawn forward, something like that. Anyway, yeah, it's not clear right away what the knight is doing on c7. It's got to go somewhere. It does guard the b5 square and keeps that knight from hopping in, so maybe that's one point. Anyway, I went e6, defending the knight, and he just continued developing with knight f3. And I went bishop e7, and here I start maybe wandering off the beaten path here. I should really just play knight c6, and that holds true for the next couple of moves. I think the next three moves. I don't know why I'm not playing this perfectly natural developing move. Anyway, I go with bishop e7. This allows early castling, so it's not completely pointless. He castles, I castle, and then he goes d4. And once again, I can play knight c6 here, and it would be a good move, getting this piece developed in. If he wants to open up the center, he can take. Instead, I played this move a6, which controls the b5 square, keeps his knight from hopping in, and maybe I plan to play b5 and c4 if I get the chance. But he doesn't give me the chance. He starts taking things at this point. So I think that's that's what's wrong with my strategies, is I'm not allowing for sort of the natural moves of my opponent. And already at this point, he has the option of giving me an isolated queen's pawn. And he goes about doing that. And I didn't really recognize that possibility either. But when he takes here, even after I take with the queen, he can trade queens and still give me an isolated queen's pawn. So I'd be much better to take back with a pawn, go into this IQP position with more force on the board, try and get my pieces actively posted, play the typical kind of IQP game. Instead, I go in with the queen, and after this trade, I have the weakness of the isolated queen's pawn. This can be blockaded and attacked, and I don't have any of the compensating advantages. So anyway, he plays knight e5, which attacks my pawn, and I defend it with bishop e6. It's interesting, the chess engine has a different idea of how to play this. Knight c6 is kind of an interesting idea even here. The point is that if he takes the knight, then this brings a pawn to the center and helps defend the pawn on d5. So I like that knight c6 idea. Also, rook e8, just hitting the knight and gaining a tempo, seems to be the way for black to play most actively. So not just defending the pawn, but sort of counterattacking. Let's see. I defended the pawn. He drops his knight back to d3, hitting my bishop. So the bishop could go to d4, and that's a more active post for the bishop. Defending, cancel that. It can always retreat along this diagonal back to f6, and it also looks out at the b2 pawn and kind of pins it against the rook. So those are interesting ideas with that bishop d4 move. Instead, I played bishop e7, and after this, he's just winning a pawn. He goes knight f4, hitting the bishop, hitting the pawn, and there's no good way to hold on to it. Even if I play rook d8, he's going to follow up with rook d1, and I'm going to lose that pawn. So I play knight c6 finally, get the knight out, and this isn't, I mean, that's not a mistake at this point. I'm going to lose the pawn one way or another. My mistakes were all earlier. So he takes on d5, and I want to keep the pieces on at this point. I'm down material, I'm down a pawn, and so I want to try and create some complications and some activity. But well, he's just got a very active position himself, and he continues to use that. He drops his knight into c7, hitting my rook, hitting my bishop, and forcing some more trades. And these trades do benefit white in general, although in this case he has also lost one of his more active pieces, so that was kind of there were pluses and minuses to that maneuver, but it did create another weakness for him to attack, and he still has the bishop pair. So overall, it's pretty good for white here. Probably a winning advantage. He goes bishop d2, and I went rook f7. One idea is to defend this b pawn so the knight's free to move, and the other idea is to try and maybe create some action on the f file by doubling rooks here. He goes rook a to c1, hitting my bishop. Drop the bishop back, and b4. So all this is pretty well played. b4, though, maybe a little bit loose. Like bishop to b4 is an interesting move here. Bishop to b4 would also control the f8 square and prevent me from doubling. What else? e3 or bishop to c3. Yeah, he has a lot of options. It looks like piece play is the order of the day in this position. So pushing this pawn forward, I'm not sure what it accomplishes, and maybe it's a target in some cases. Anyway, I continue to double on the f-file, and I definitely have pressure here. But he can win a pawn on c6, and that's what he does. He takes on c6, and oh yeah, there's this funny way of playing. This is kind of an interesting sequence. I'll go through this chess engine recommended line, and then we'll compare it to what happened in the game, because it's kind of similar, but we'll see a few differences. So the engine says, rather than take back the bishop right away, remember I'm a piece down here, throw in this move, rook takes f2. It looks like this can be done with tempo, because there's this dangerous threat of check, a discovered check on the king, because of the bishop here on this diagonal. So that forces a trade. And then coming in with the rook. And still there's this dangerous discovered check here he needs to do something about. But the chess engine, of course, being fearless, doesn't do anything about it. He plays bishop takes b7, gathering another pawn. Okay, so I use the check. And the discovered check allows me to recapture a piece. So I get this bishop instead of taking the bishop, the light squared bishop. So king goes to h1, rook takes, and then he grabs another pawn. And so we get this position where I have one pawn which is passed, and he has two pawns which are connected and passed, and we have bishops of opposite color. And so it looks like this is just a 1 point advantage to white, which means that I have pretty good drawing chances as we get into the endgame, unless there's some way for white to make progress here, which the chess engine isn't finding. Looks like maybe this is something I can hold as a draw. One advantage I have is that I've got his king cut off, and the other advantage is, in terms of drawing potential, is that I have this opposite colored bishop, so I can control the dark squares, and he can't get enough force on them. So that would be best play. It's kind of interesting, I thought. In the game, I just took the bishop back right away after he took my knight. And then after he grabbed the pawn, which is the best move, then I played rook takes f2. And if this were played correctly, let's see, he played takes, and now right here he doesn't make the best move. The best move for white here is rook takes, and kind of an interesting way to meet this threat. There's this threat of a discovered attack on the king, so you grab a pawn and you also attack this piece that is going to give the check, so that when I play rook takes, now let's see, oh, it's whose turn is it here? Bishop to e1. Yeah, rook takes a6. This is a new variation. he didn't play this, but this is best play. He's attacking my bishop, and so when I take here with check, he grabs my bishop to get rid of the check. I grab his bishop. And if you compare this position to the previous one, it's really the same in terms of pawn structure. He has these two pawns, and I have this pawn, and I have his king cut off with my rook. The only difference is, or the major difference is, the bishops are gone from the board. So this is a much more straightforward win for white with these connected pass pawns and the rook. And the rook has my king cut off. So this position is winning for white. So that would be best play and how white should go on to win this game. Instead, he played a much more natural move, I think. I think this move is pretty natural. Rook takes a6 if you need to spot that tactical idea. And he didn't spot it. He played king h1. So now I can grab this pawn. His bishop is under attack. And now the best square for his bishop is maybe on this diagonal, bishop to c3. This would introduce a threat of rook to c7, which would fork the bishop and threaten rook takes g7 check. So that would be best for white here. Instead, he after I took the pawn, he moved the bishop to f4, just not as active a post. And now things are about even. He has this idea of check and then check and picking up my bishop. But his bishop has come into a square where it's vulnerable, so I can counter this with a threat on his bishop by playing e5. And now he moved his bishop forward to g5, and now I grab another pawn. So that allowed me to pick up a pawn here, so that's why it's just completely even. So he gives this check. I go here, he gives this check. And the key point is that I go with the king to g6. I'm attacking his bishop and he's attacking mine. So if we just trade, if he takes the bishop, I take the bishop, it's a completely drawn, completely even rook and pawn endgame. So that's probably how the game should have ended at this point. But instead he retreated his bishop. And now I have a chance to save my bishop and also save my pawn. So I'm actually a pawn up at this point. And now I have a slight edge and I'm going to play for the win. And I keep an edge. Actually, there's just one more kind of interesting moment in the game where he had a chance to get back in it. So let's go forward. He gives another check. He drives my king forward. Actually, the king wants to go forward. Let's see. He goes bishop to e7. He's got to get this bishop back into the game. And now king to g4 threatens checkmate. I didn't hit on this idea originally. Yeah, checkmate in 5. But it's interesting that from g4 the king can come to either h3 or f3, and both those squares threaten checkmate, and the king can't escape from the corner. The bishop is guarding that square, the rook is guarding this whole rank. So the king has no moves, and I can just bring my king in here and mate him, and he can't really stop it. Didn't spot that at this point. I came up with this idea later, but here I was focused on the passed pawn. I just started pushing it, and this is also winning. So it's not a big mistake. But let's see. I go bishop f2. He's kicking my bishop around. He goes g4 check. And once again, I could take this pawn because even though he grabs my pawn, potentially with check, I have king to f3, which threatens checkmate and threatens the rook. So it would have been safe to take that pawn. Instead, I go here. He comes in with his bishop to f8. I move my pawn forward. He goes bishop g7 check. But now this drives my king forward some more, so this is helping me out. Bishop h6 check, king to f3. And he goes rook c3 check. I block with the pawn. And he goes h3. I was already threatening checkmate with the king on f3. There was this threat. So he plays h3 to give his king an escape. And now, I'd spotted these checkmating ideas, and I was going to play, I did play the move king to g3. And that's actually the move that gives white a chance to draw once again. So here's your tactical quiz moment for this video. After king g3, what's the best move for white? How can white hold the game at that point? Okay, I'm going to give the answer away. I did play king g3, and what he could play, keeping in mind that his king is about to be mated, he can play bishop takes e3. And what's clever about this is that the bishop here is defending the c1 square. So if I try to deliver this check, rook to a1 check. He can just block it with his rook, and we just trade out. And actually, looks like it looks like black is better in that game. What's the best play? Oh, it's best to block with the bishop. And anyway, he can try and hold this position. So this is how white can stay in the game. So he didn't spot that idea after king g3. He just reacted to the mate threat, brought his rook back. But now the pawn comes through. And there's no way of stopping this after this check. I just hide my king away from checks, and then he resigned at this point. So anyway, interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.